Much of the fun of Elden Ring, and indeed a lot of the story and world-building elements in the games FromSoftware produces, like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, is in trying to figure out how the pieces fit together. I've been doing that with Elden Ring basically since it came out, and I've been doing it especially with specific characters. So today, I'm going to make my personal case as to the mystery of who Melina is really. If I had to boil down my theory here, I'd say this. I believe that Melina and Ranni are the same person, that Ranni was the product of Radagon and Marika passing off their additional offspring as Renala's child, and that by doing so, they sowed the seeds for Ranni's eventual renunciation of her status as an Empyrean and the Greater Will and Golden Order altogether. I know that's a lot, but I'm going to make my case here. And while some of the thoughts I share here will include speculation, I'll be providing as much in-game evidence for the portions that I think are provable. As a sneak peek, I believe everything I said in my thesis statement are claims that can be backed up with the evidence. So let's get this show on the road. 1. Who are Ranni and Melina? Ranni the Witch is one of the demigods, and if you aren't fully sure what that means, there's a character that may be able to help. Finger Reader Ania, who we first encounter in the game's hub location, the Round Table Hold.
Great runes are the stuff of demigods, the children of the goddess, Queen Marika, she who is vessel of the Elden Ring. Tainted by the strength of their runes, her children warred, but none could become Elden Lord, indeed. But remember one thing. The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika.
That last bit here regarding demigods being direct offspring of Queen Marika is kind of a problem, because, officially speaking, Ranni is the daughter of Queen Renala of Caria and the second Elden Lord, Radagon, which means, officially speaking, she's not actually a direct descendant of Queen Marika at all. She was raised to the status of demigod when her father, Radagon, left her mother, Renala, and married Queen Marika. But that's just the official story. I believe there's more to her origins than the game directly tells us, and we'll get there. Melina is a mysterious NPC character who first gives us the means to summon our spectral steed Torrent, helps convert our runes to strength in order to level up, and first invites you and transports you to the Round Table Hold. She also offers some backstory development and world building, where at certain sites of grace, the place where you save your game, level up, or respawn upon death, she shares quotes from Queen Marika herself.
In Marika's own words, "Hark, brave warriors. Hark, my Lord Godfrey. We commend your deeds. Guidance hath delivered ye through each ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erd Tree."
The game never tells us where exactly she fits into the grand power arrangement directly, but she has a mission and she needs the help of you, the Tarnished, to see it through. Now, right off the bat, these two characters share something in common. They are both spirits. We never meet Ranni the Witch in the flesh, because before the events of the game, she has stolen a fragment of a rune of the Elden Ring itself called the Rune of Destined Death, and she's used that fragment of the Rune of Destined Death in a ritual designed to cast away her body but continue to live on as a spirit. We meet Ranni's spirit as it inhabits a doll, and later on, upon finding her again, we get the following dialogue.
Indeed, I am the witch Ranni. I stole a fragment of the Rune of Death and used it to forge the god-slaying black knives through fearsome rite. I did it all. But sadly for thee, the curse mark thou seekest is not to be found here. I have slain the body I was born into and cast it away, and it is upon that flesh the curse mark is carved.
Melina is also a spirit, and she appears and disappears at sites of grace. She explicitly says she's been burned and bodiless, that she was burned long ago and lost her purpose. She speaks of her mother, who gave her the new purpose to burn the Erd Tree to allow a tarnished to enter and take up the mantle of Elden Lord. I believe Melina to have lost her body in the very ritual that Ranni undertook with the fragment of the Rune of Destined Death to cast away her body. The ritual involved the slaying of Ranni's flesh at the same time as slaying the spirit of Godwyn the Golden. This is what allows Ranni's spirit to remain in the world and affect it. This is laid out to us in the item description for the Curse Mark of Death, which can be found on the burned carcass of a woman on top of the Divine Tower of Liurnia. The Curse Mark itself identifies the body as Ranni's. The item states, "Curse Mark carved into the discarded flesh of Ranni the Witch," also known as the half-wheel wound of the centipede. This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, 2 demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into 2 half-wheels. Ranni was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. Now, you may ask yourself, if Ranni and Melina are both spirits, how can they both be spirits of the same person? Let me explain by looking at Ranni's status as an Empyrean. 2. Ranni the Empyrean. What is an Empyrean? An Empyrean is a being who is a potential candidate to replace the current god of the current age. In this case, the current god is Queen Marika herself. How does one become an Empyrean? They are appointed as such by the 2 fingers. Ranni was named an Empyrean by her own set of 2 fingers, which means Ranni would be able to replace Marika as queen. Her status as an Empyrean is also directly stated by Ranni to be the reason she wanted to cast aside her flesh in the first place. There are only a few characters that are confirmed to be Empyreans. Ranni is named an Empyrean, as well as her 2 siblings, the twins Miquella and Melania. Ranni explains that being an Empyrean makes you beholden to the 2 fingers and the greater will. You could say you'd be under the 2 fingers' thumb, so to speak. The other confirmed Empyrean, besides Ranni and her twin siblings, is Queen Marika herself, who was an Empyrean who rose to the status of a god in the age prior to the current. The process is cyclical. An Empyrean rises to godhood and rules over the lands between through the Elden Ring, an object of power that is capable of rewriting the very laws of the lands between. And I don't mean a constitutional amendment. I mean being able to determine how death works, for example. That rune that I mentioned earlier, the Rune of Destined Death, was a portion of the Elden Ring that was removed because it contained the fated ends of all the demigods and even Queen Marika herself. By removing it, she made herself into Marika the Eternal and granted her demigod children immortality. That is the kind of power the Elden Ring has over the lands between. Normally, as the age carries on, it inevitably starts to decline, and new Empyreans are named and pitted against one another with the goal of rising above the others and starting a new age with themselves as god. Of these 4 confirmed Empyreans, 3 of them are shown to have split identities, though they take different forms. First, let's talk about the twin Empyreans, Miquella and Melania. These 2 seem to be the youngest children Marika produced, and we know she conceived them with her second husband, the second Elden Lord, Radagon, who is Queen Marika. Queen Marika is confirmed at the end of the game through Goldmask's questline to be one and the same as the second Elden Lord, Radagon.
To think that Radagon was Marika herself, or at least such is all I can interpret from the rhythm and calculus of his finger. How would such a thing even have been possible, I wonder? Sadly, I cannot comprehend it myself. Do you have a fuller understanding of the matter?
There is some debate as to how literally we can take this claim that Radagon is Marika, and if it is literal, then whether or not that has always been the case. I'm of the opinion that it was always the case, and Radagon was always a split identity of Marika's because, well, it fits the pattern of Empyreans having this split identity. But even if that's not the case, that they were always one and the same, I think we can say with a strong degree of certainty that Radagon and Marika were one and the same earlier in the timeline than many think. But let's put a pin in that. What we do know is that at the end of the game, Radagon is Marika. After they united in marriage, they had children, and we know they were also one and the same at that point from the game itself. These twins were born cursed, specifically due to being the product of a single god, confirmed by the remembrance of the Rot goddess dropped after defeating Melina. Remembrance of Melina, goddess of Rot, hewn into the Erd Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. Miquella and Melina are both the children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans, but suffered afflictions from birth. One was cursed with eternal childhood, and the other harbored rot within. We get confirmation that the twins were also named Empyreans by their own set of two fingers.
I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Miquella, and Melina could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own two fingers, as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age.
Now, there are things the game tells us is true of all Empyreans, and things it doesn't directly tell us is true of all Empyreans, but that we can surmise is true by the events of the game. Heck, there are some things the game implies is true of all Empyreans, but don't appear to be true at all. For example, we have something of a rule established through the game that an Empyrean is given what is called a shadow. And we see two examples of a shadow. The first is named Blaidd, who is Ranni's shadow, and is a wolf man who serves her. There's more to their relationship, but it's not as relevant to this video's topic. The second shadow we encounter is Maliketh, also a wolf man, who is denoted to be Queen Marika's own shadow, and is also referred to as her half-brother. We get some of that information from the Remembrance of the Black Blade, which drops when Maliketh is defeated. Remembrance of Maliketh, the Black Blade, hewn into the Erd Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can also be used to gain a great bounty of runes. Maliketh was a shadow-bound beast, given to his Empyrean. Marika's sole need of her shadow was a vessel to lock away destined death. Even then, she betrayed him. What's interesting about this is that the other two confirmed Empyreans, the twins, Miquella and Melina, have nary a mention of their own shadow. There's a lot of theories as to why that is. Perhaps Melina took on the role of Miquella's shadow when she became his blade. Or perhaps there really isn't a strict rule that Empyreans have a shadow, and instead they are given to those Empyreans who the two fingers name, but who have some reservations about their loyalty. But I do think this is a purposeful inconsistency meant to have us asking what the situation truly is regarding the shadow of Empyreans, in order for us to question the other gaps in information we have in regarding the other potential rules. Which brings me back to the various personas Empyreans are shown to have. This detail is one that is shown to be even more consistent than the shadow-bound beast inclusion. We see examples with both of the twins. Miquella is hinted at throughout the base game as having an alternate persona in the form of Saint Trina. We have Miquella's lily, a delicate water lily of unalloyed gold that has started to fade and wilt. Material used for crafting items, exceedingly rare to find. A flower signifying faith in the Halid tree, thought to be beloved by the Empyrean Miquella in his youth. And Saint Trina's lily, a pale purple water lily that is on the verge of wilting. Material used for crafting items, exceedingly rare to find. A symbol of faith in Saint Trina, dulls the senses in agitation. And there is a very clear visual connection between these two flowers. Of note is that Saint Trina's often understood to be a girl, or at the very least feminine. We read about this with the Sword of Saint Trina item description. Silver sword carried by clerics of Saint Trina. Inflicts sleep ailment upon foes. Saint Trina is an enigmatic figure. Some say she is a comely young girl. Others are sure he is a boy. The only certainty is that their appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. There are more from the base game, but suffice it to say, there were strong connections. And then we get to the DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree, where we get the following dialogue from a spirit NPC as we approach the resting place of Saint Trina. The spirit says, "I was once told a coffin could convey its passenger upon a gentle cruise to the velvet garden of the deepest purple. Oh, to slumber in such a paradise. Kindly Miquella, I see that you've thrown away something you should not have. How will you salvation offer to those who cannot be saved, when you could not even save your other self? Oh, please grant me the courage to fly to your feet, my dearest Saint Trina." Now, I mentioned Miquella is cursed for being the product of a single god. His curse is an eternal youth. He stays young and is considered quite beautiful, even described in feminine terms. And Saint Trina is described as being feminine. I think there is some larger symbolism of linking beauty and femininity and youth together in a purposefully uncomfortable and confusing way. Once we actually get to meet Saint Trina, who is taking the very specific shape of a flower, we can interact with her to imbibe her nectar. There's a lot of stuff going on in the dualism of Saint Trina and Miquella. That's not the focus here. But once you imbibe, you die. And then you respawn at the nearby site of grace, allowing you to once again imbibe. Do this 4 times and you are treated to a little bit of dialogue.
Would be Miquella's prison. A caged divinity is beyond saving. You must kill Miquella. Grant him forgiveness.
Not only do we get to hear from this alternate personality of Miquella, but Saint Trina is explicitly in opposition to Miquella's plans, which we will come back to later. The DLC's story, though, is relevant because it is following Miquella's own journey at attempting to become a god and supplant his mother Marika. And as the spirit NPC I shared implies, this seems to be in service of unburdening himself of aspects of him. Saint Trina's nectar grants eternal sleep, and is said to grant people a pleasurable sleep at that.
Saint Trina, let me hear your voice in my everlasting slumber.
The implication that Saint Trina grants something of a sweet death to others as a means of showing compassion. In fact, her very dialogue asks you to grant Miquella the gift of death for the same reason. Melina also has her own offshoot, but hers takes a different form, and forms a different dynamic to her source. You can meet the character Millicent in a church in Caelid, overcome with scarlet rot, as she is as well. Quick review, the reason Caelid is covered in rot has to do with the curse Melina is afflicted with at birth for also being the product of a single god, just like her twin, Miquella. She was cursed with the scarlet rot that rots away all things, even the gods themselves can succumb to the rot. And during a war that happened a long time before your Tarnish jumps back into the lands between, Melina led her forces against General Starscourge Radahn, a fellow demigod and brother to Ranni the Witch. Though Melina is widely regarded as the hardest boss in the base game and had not ever been defeated even as her body rotted away, her and Radahn fought to a standstill in his base of operations, Caelid, and she whispered to the promised consort Radahn that Miquella awaits him, which we learn from the young lion's armor item description. The golden armor worn by Radahn in his younger years, proudly adorned with the heroic red accents. It is fitting attire for a lion. When Melina, blade of Miquella, let the rot flower blossom in Aeonia, Radahn heard a murmur in his ear. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. That's when she let loose the scarlet rot that overtook Caelid and still rots its lands to this very day. Millicent is suffering from the scarlet rot, but thanks to a special needle you just found on the ground and the help of a random man in a shack repairing said needle, she's able to stop the advancement of the scarlet rot. Throughout the game, you will come across her as she journeys north, looking for something. Once we get to where Melina rests, inside Miquella's own Haligtree, we get some additional dialogue near the prayer room site of grace.
I am of Melinia's blood, but in what capacity I know not. I could be sister, daughter, or an offshoot. Whatever the case though, I am certain of a kinship between us. There is something I must return to Melina, the will that was once her own, the dignity, the sense of self that allowed her to resist the call of the scarlet rot, the pride she abandoned, to meet Radahn's measure.
In contrast to Saint Trina, who never describes her own view of her relationship to Miquella, Millicent is honestly as confused as we are as to what to call herself in relation to Melina. but she does identify herself as either being or carrying something that Melania has lost. My personal view is that Millicent represents Melania's pride as a swordsman, which she had to abandon when she was tied with Radahn in order to even consider releasing the Scarlet Rot, as opposed to a proper win by her steel alone. In addition to being part of a pattern of split personalities, it also seems the pattern includes these personalities being beholden to a certain quality of their source. For Saint Trina, she is Miquella's compassion and love. For Melania, Millicent seems to be her pride as a swordsman. Here's where we get to the split of the other named Empyrean, besides the twins or Ranni, Queen Marika herself. I've already mentioned that I am of the opinion that Radagon has always been an aspect of Marika, and is therefore always a part of her. My personal belief is that Radagon represents her strongest loyalties to the Greater Will and the Golden Order itself. In fact, the reason I believe that is also the bit of dialogue that people who don't believe them to be one and the same point to as their evidence.
In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both, mine other self.
A lot of people view this speech provided to us in the form of a quote that Melina shares with us at the Queen's bedchamber site of grace, and take it very literally. They say, see, it says, thou art yet to become me, thou art yet to become a god. Therefore, it means they were always two separate people. But I don't view it that way. I view this as a final discussion, a final argument between Marika and Radagon. And I feel confident in saying so because in the same little speech, she still calls him mine other self. She even calls Radagon the leal hound of the Golden Order, and I don't believe she means it sweetly. She's calling him a loyal dog, and in my view, she's telling him that she is the god and the one in charge of leading, while he's only meant to follow. And I believe this is due to a disagreement about what direction to take the Golden Order. He'd studied and developed Golden Order fundamentalism, and he'd started to outgrow his role as a follower in pushing the agenda of fundamentalism. Not to mention, in the DLC, they include another use of other self to describe Saint Trina in relation to Miquella, as I shared earlier. Kindly Miquella, I see you've thrown away something you should not have. How will you salvation offer to those who cannot be saved, when you could not even save your other self? The game goes out of its way to tell us that Radagon is Marika, and I think its meaning is twofold, that Radagon has been another identity of Marika's all along, and that the identity of Marika is no longer home in the body held inside the Erd Tree. In fact, we see as much when we break into the Erd Tree and find Marika's limp body held up by a rune arc. It falls to the ground, lifeless, before Radagon takes over the husk and fights as a champion of the Golden Order. Marika is no longer home, and so Radagon is both a splinter of Marika, and he has now finally done what she taunted him about. He's become her and taken on her role as god in the Lands Between. Yet, this would not stand to the very foundation of Marika as Marika the Eternal. And this is what leads the Erd Tree to hold them both entwined in their thorns deep within the tree itself. And we know that it is very possible for split personalities like this to be at odds, given that Saint Trina was at cross purposes with Miquella as well. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that I've now shared 3 out of 4 of the named Empyreans have this trait of a split identity or additional personality. The 4th is Ranni herself. Does the game at any point confirm that Ranni has such a split? No, it doesn't. In truth, I think she does, or more accurately, I think Ranni is the split personality. And her source? Melina. Some of you may have been expecting me to say the opposite, that Ranni is the source and Melina the offshoot, but I have more evidence and reasons for why I think the opposite is the case. And it all comes back to my rather pointed way of describing Ranni's character at the beginning. I said, officially, she is the daughter of Radagon and Queen Rennala. Well, part of my theory is that Ranni was raised as Rennala's daughter, but that her life as Ranni was all a ruse developed by Queen Marika for control over the Lands Between in ways other than just simple conquest. Hi there, this is Ellis from the editing room. In this section and beyond, you are going to hear me mispronounce the word cuckoo a lot. I pronounce it cuckoo. Now, you may wonder if I've ever heard the word before, and I have. However, I was under the impression that the UK pronunciation was a lot more different than the US pronunciation, and given the various accents of the characters involved, I thought I was providing a more resonant way of saying this word. Turns out, the UK version is not as different as I thought. I considered going back and re-recording or even just superimposing the correct pronunciation over each time I say the word. But then I thought about how the cuckoo bird is literally the origin of the term cuck. In my view, either we should be saying cuckoo or we should call cucks kooks for consistency's sake. And as protest for this discrepancy, I've decided to leave it as it is. I hope you don't find it too distracting, but if you do, I recommend submitting your complaints to the English language, either by mail to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary's publisher's address, or by writing a handwritten letter and delivering it to wherever books are sold near you. 3. Ranni and Melina's origins. Whoever the Lands Between version of Mori would be, maybe someone like Bare, they would have quite the sensationalized show, because I think it's possible not only to have surprises on who the father was, but in the case of Ranni, I think there'd be surprises on who the mother was. I think Ranni was always the daughter of Radagon and Marika. In fact, I think all of Renala's children are the children of Radagon and Marika. But wait, I hear you say, if you think that, then why did you spend all that time pointing out that the twins are cursed and that the curse is pointedly stated to be the result of being children of a single god? If that's true for other children besides the twins, why aren't there more cursed children from Marika's brood? To which I would say, there are! In fact, I think most of these kids have some sort of curse. I think the curse is most drastic and most dramatic for those children who are the product of solely Marika and Radagon. The short version is I think that the difference comes in whether other sources were used in creating the children in addition to Marika and Radagon. But that doesn't guarantee that no curse will show up. For example, Marika had 3 children with her first husband and first Elden Lord, Lord Godfrey, Godwyn the Golden, and the twins, Mohg and Morgott. Mohg and Morgott being afflicted with the curse of being omens. Though neither curse is attributed to them being of a single god, like Miquella and Melania were, and Godwyn himself not having any allusions to being cursed. In fact, I think this is something of a reference to alloys with gold. Gold being important to the Golden Order, the Grace of Gold, etc. Sticking with Godfrey as the example, we had the golden hue in his eyes that is common to humans in the Lands Between. He lost it, and him and his kin were exiled and called tarnished. But you know what metal doesn't tarnish very easily or really at all? Gold. Godfrey came to be part of the Golden Order, but he himself is more akin to iron or steel. Then we have Radagon's children with Renala, Praetor Rykard, General Radahn, and Lunar Princess Ranni.
General Radahn, Praetor Rykard, Lunar Princess Ranni.
Renala's connection with the full moon, which reflects the golden light of the sun into a much paler version, to me is an allusion to silver, a metal very important to alchemy, and that also has ties with certain creations of the astrologers, of which Renala was both descended and had risen above. In other words, perhaps adding her as a source created an interesting alloy of the gold of the Golden Order and the silver of the Carian rule. Those who subscribe to the idea that Radagon and Marika only merged later in the timeline will be skeptical of any involvement of Marika in the process of creating these children. In fact, the way Radagon and Renala became involved in the first place is described as Radagon leading a campaign against the forces of Caria, and to some, that implies they were in separate locations. However, I'd point out 2 things in regards to whether Radagon and Marika could be the same being, but in 2 locations. 1, we see other Empyreans and their offshoots that are absolutely in different locations. Millicent is found very far away from where Melania is finally encountered, and St. Trina is disposed of in a very different part of the map from where we have our final confrontation with Miquella. But 2, just because the common understanding of the Lands Between is that Radagon and Marika were separate and were in 2 locations at once, doesn't make it true. I'd argue it would not be difficult for Marika to present in the guise of Radagon, given we see such a physical transformation take place at the end of the game, and we have no accounting of her being seen publicly in Leyndell or elsewhere at the same time as Radagon being seen publicly in Liurnia. There is an unfortunate lack of newspapers in the Lands Between to give any public accounting of anyone, really. But let's say for the sake of argument that they were not one person at all times in the past, that they used to be separate, distinct individuals, and only merged into one at some unnamed point in time. Can we say when that happened? Not for certain, but I do think it was very likely before Radagon's marriage to Rennala, and the evidence I have for that is Messmer's existence. Messmer, the Impaler, who was introduced during the DLC Shadow of the Erdtree. Is Messmer confirmed to be Radagon's child? No. No one is confirmed to be his father. I think there's a good case that he is Radagon's son. First, Messmer has the telltale red hair of Radagon's brood. There's also a similarity to Melania and Miquella, who are confirmed to be the children of Marika and Radagon. What is that similarity? Messmer is also born cursed, as confirmed by the item description of the Remembrance of the Wild Boar Rider, which is dropped by Commander Gaius upon his defeat. Remembrance of Commander Gaius hewn into the Shadow Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. Both were as elder brothers to the lion, and both were cursed from birth. In spite of, or perhaps because of this very reason, Gaius was both Messmer's friend and the leader of his men. Now, my personal headcanon is that Messmer is Marika's firstborn. However, given that we don't have direct knowledge confirming him to be the firstborn, I won't go so far as to assert that here. This does place Messmer in an interesting portion of the timeline, though, in a way I think we do get textual support for. It says, both were as elder brothers to the lion, and both were cursed from birth, both referring to Gaius and Messmer himself. The reference to the lion is meant to refer to Radahn, who is one of Ranni's brothers, and is also officially the child of Queen Rennala of Caria and Radagon. The pair are said to have had 3 children, and in reviewing the game lore, I have yet to find anything that indicates Radagon was stepping out on Rennala. Is it technically possible? Yes. But I don't think it's likely because Marika went through all the trouble of having Radagon publicly leave Rennala to come marry her before copulating and conceiving the twins. I think it would be rather strange that they felt the need to go to that trouble for the twins, who are officially demigods, yet pay no attention to Messmer's mysterious parentage. And it should be noted that Messmer's status as a demigod is not in question. When you defeat him, you are greeted by the message, demigod felled. Now, you may say, well, Marika hid Messmer away, doesn't that preclude shame? To which I would say, absolutely, but shame about what? The text itself implies his cursed nature to be the source of the shame in the Remembrance of the Impaler item description, which you get for defeating Messmer. Remembrance of Messmer the Impaler, hewn into the Shadow Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. A malevolent snake writhed within Messmer, and so his very mother plucked out his eye and put in its place a seal of grace. Yet, having done so, her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of shadow, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin, and a hatred that would not be confined. It's also possible that Marika was shamed by the specific details of the curse and what the base serpent may represent, but that's a topic for another day. My point here is that I do think Messmer's father was Radagon, even though it's not directly stated, and I don't think it's likely Messmer was conceived while Radagon was married to Rennala. But even if he was, his afflicted nature implies that he was born to a single god like his younger siblings. And if that's the case, that Radagon was the father and that he and Marika were already united as one, that would imply that Radagon and Marika were one well before he fathered children with Rennala. I believe Radagon's marriage to Rennala to be part of a ploy by Marika to stamp out competition through controlling the lineages of those competitors, by supplanting any potential offspring with her own. I think Marika first ordered her Leal Hound of the Golden Order, her champion, Radagon, to conquer the Carians, but his campaign resulted in a stalemate. This is speculation on my part, but did Marika see the stalemate and decide to have Radagon take another approach instead of war? One that involved seduction, courtship? I think so. Muriel, also known as the Turtle Pope or the Pastor of Vows, hangs about the Church of Vows in Liurnia. He tells us about the war and the wedding of Radagon and Rennala most comprehensively.
It is here, at the Church of Vows, that the great houses of the Erd Tree and the Moon were joined by the matrimonial bond between red-haired Radagon and Rennala of the Full Moon. You wish to know more of Lord Radagon? Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host. When he met Lady Rennala in battle, he soon repented his territorial aggressions there, and became husband to the Carian Queen. However, when Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Rennala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord. The mystery endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Rennala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
Heck, the fact that Radagon's secret is being alluded to while discussing Radagon's campaign on Liurnia and subsequent marriage to Rennala all but confirms to me that this secret was already in play way back then. And here's where things get messy, because birth in the Lands Between is already a rather vague notion. There are creators like the Tarnished Archaeologist, who has great work, who has made the case that birth doesn't work like the biologic process at all in the Lands Between, at least not for humans. And he instead posits that Erdtree birth is the form birth takes for those humans who the Grace of Gold has been extended to. That does make a lot of sense when you consider the reverence paid to those who receive an Erdtree burial, where their body is given to the tree and they become one with it. He also mentions that Melina's commentary on Bach's discussion of his mother prompts her to ask what it means to be born of a mother. And he even goes so far as to say that the more carnal biological form of reproduction could be something relegated to those outside the Golden Order's world order. That Bach, being a demi-human, is what allows his creation from the baser form of coming into being. Meaning that an Erdtree birth is as strictly controlled as an Erdtree burial, meant only for those who are part of this sacred divine order, as told by the Golden Order itself. Is this some form of reincarnation? Are the denizens of the Lands Between who fall within the bounds of the Golden Order's rules those who have been brought into the world by being born from the Erdtree's boughs and branches? One of my favorite pieces of evidence presented by the likes of the Tarnished Archaeologist is the Queen's bed in her bedchamber. It pretty closely resembles the likes of the basins meant to capture sap throughout the Lands Between. Was this where she brought forth her children into the world, catching them from the tree in her basin? Their importance denoted in precisely where the tree chose to excrete them? Their nobility and royalty a product of Marika's grace that governs all, and their being provided to Marika through placement in her very bed, her birthing bed. I don't know for sure, but I will say it fits a lot of Rennala's own storyline. She was left with her precious amber egg, amber being the dried resin left by sap, and in it is the rune of the unborn, the item description of which has this to say: amber egg clutched by Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, great rune of the unborn demigods, perfects those who have been born anew. Children born anew by Rennala are all frail and short-lived, imperfect beings, each and all. Her queen's crescent crown also adds detail. A tall crown depicting the moon, worn by Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, increases intelligence. When Rennala, head of both the Academy of Raya Lucaria and the Carian royal family, lost her husband, Radagon, her heart went along with him. And then, those at the Academy realized that Rennala was no champion after all. It is also said that after Radagon left Rennala, her wits went with him, and she clutches her amber egg and continually tries to perfect the imperfectible, continually tries to use birth and rebirth on her sweetings, as she calls them. But the egg itself seems symbolic, and the symbolism becomes more apparent when you put it in context with other details of Raya Lucaria Academy itself. Details that paint the picture of Ranni's origins in a way that change a ton of context to everything related to Ranni, Rennala, the Golden Order. All of it. Here we have the map of Raya Lucaria Academy, where you can fight and defeat Rennala, and where upon her defeat, you can have her use the Rune of the Unborn to birth you anew, which is a fancy way of saying reallocate your stat points. There are a variety of smaller locations here, but the one I want to draw your attention towards is the Church of the Cuckoo. Now, there is an interesting distinction between the knights that serve the Carian royal family, of which Rennala is the monarch. Carian knights are seen throughout Liurnia of the Lakes. They carry glintstone weapons and use variations of glintstone sorcery. In Raya Lucaria, though, we instead have a larger presence of Cuckoo knights. Rennala is the Carian queen and was considered the champion of the Academy. However, several items have descriptions that indicate that the Academy lost faith in the Carian royal family, and thus their knights. I mentioned it above with the queen's crescent crown, but we also see it in her robes, leggings, and bracelet, which all end with the detail, and then those at the Academy realized that Rennala was no champion after all. In fact, she's essentially their prisoner here in the Academy, and they leave her be in the library, but they've clearly severed ties with the Carians on the whole. The Cuckoo Knights were there to pick up the slack, but they are not terribly loyal to the Academy. The level of loyalty is shown in item descriptions like the Cuckoo Knight armor. Armor worn by Raya Lucaria Academy Knights. Its left breast is emblazoned with a peering cuckoo, whence came their name. Perhaps the bird's shrewd gaze is an expression of their refusal to be mere servants of the Academy. Having only agreed to be their knights in a contract to hire basis, as stated in the item description for the sorcery incantation for Scholar's Shield, one of the glintstone sorceries of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, enchants shield held in the left hand with additional damage negation. This sorcery can be cast while in motion, taught to the Knights of the Cuckoo by the Academy as payments for their contract. Who were these knights, though? Were they mercenaries in operation for a while? I don't think so. In fact, I think they are the remnants of Radagon's own forces that he led against the Carian royal family. First, that would explain their proximity in being contracted by the Academy, and certainly they'd be attractive for the Academy to hire if they'd already done battle against Caria's forces. One of Ranni's most loyal followers, the blacksmith Iji, explains their involvement.
Brave Tarnished. A word of warning, if you please. This territory once belonged to the Carian royal family. Their manor lies not far beyond this point. When the Raya Lucaria Academy turned on the Carians, the Knights of the Cuckoo descended on this tract. After leveling it, they carried on to the manor. The Carians were taken off guard, but their strength had not waned, and they repelled the Knights' onslaught by conjuring an enchanted snare that remains potent to this day. That is why I say, Tarnished, don't go near the manor unless you wish to lie with the corpses of the heedless Knights of the Cuckoo.
Secondly, the reason that I think the Knights of the Cuckoo were former Golden Order allied soldiers is their physical resemblance in dress to other similar factions. Obviously, it is not gold, but for comparison's sake, let's also show another similar appearance of the Knights of Gelmir, who serve the master of Volcano Manor. They all have very similar design, with only their colors and emblems shifting. And given that we know the Knights of Gelmir worked for Rykard, who was at one point a loyal part of keeping with the Golden Order, it stands to reason that these different sets of armor would likely be of similar forces, but who served different portions of the order established by Marika. We even see this in similar factions that would at one point have all served the Golden Order, even if they had another leader in between serving as proxy to the Golden Order. We have the Knights of the Halig Tree, The only knight enemies that fit this same standard of appearance that don't have obvious ties to the Golden Order at first glance are the Knights of the Mausoleum, which accompany the wandering mausoleums throughout the lands between. But they do have a connection, don't they? Most pointedly, we see them all around the Deeproot Depths, which not only has a few of these mausoleums, but also is home to our good friend, the Prince of Death, Godwyn the Golden's living body. In other words, I think these are the knights who served Godwyn directly and have followed him into a living death on purpose to be his servants as the Prince of Death. All that to say that I think the Knights of the Cuckoo are the forces that Radagon left after making amends with and marrying Rennala in the Church of Vows. And though clearly framed as opportunists and simple sellswords, I think their contract with the Academy was also in line with their hidden purpose, a purpose hinted at through their designation as Knights of the Cuckoo. For those who are not aware, the cuckoo is a bird in the real world, and I think is being deliberately called upon to tell a story. The cuckoo is notable because it purposefully lays its eggs in the nests of other bird species. The cuckoo hatches and makes sure to push the other chicks or eggs in the nest out of it so that the nesting bird mistakes the cuckoo for its only child and devotes its time and resources to raising the cuckoo bird. Going back to the cuckoo knight armor and the associated item descriptions, there's an allusion to this. Armor worn by Raya Lucaria Academy Knights. Its left breast is emblazoned with a peering cuckoo, whence came their name. Perhaps the bird's shrewd glance is an expression of their refusal to be mere servants of the Academy. This implies that the relationship is not so transactional as even the Academy might think, and I think this is the biggest and clearest hint that speaks to the truth of Ranni's origins. Ranni is the cuckoo chick raised by another species of bird, Rennala, whose own offspring did not, or perhaps cannot, survive. Going back to the item description of the Rune of the Unborn, amber egg clutched by Rennala, queen of the full moon, great rune of the unborn demigods, perfects those who have been born anew. Children born anew by Rennala are all frail and short-lived, imperfect beings each and all. A lot of people read this and look at her little sweetings, beings she apparently had born anew using this very rune, and who were originally the youngest students of the Academy, and assume that it is referring to this style of reincarnation. But read it again. It says first, perfects those who have been born anew, and before that it says, great rune of the unborn demigods. The item description doesn't say that it is used to reincarnate, it says it perfects those who have been born anew. Now, clearly, the little sweetings are far from perfect, and while I think being continuously born again likely is a large part of the reason that they are so imperfect, I believe their true imperfect nature was in their original state. Now, it could be simple. They were imperfect students of the Academy, maybe for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with what I'm about to speculate on. The speculation does have merit, though. What if these sweetings were Albinaurics? The sweetings we see in the game all crawl around on the ground and seem to have no use of their legs. This is a huge connection to the other Albinaurics, especially the first generation, like Albus, who we find in the Albinauric village. Albinaurics themselves are artificial beings created by human hands. Albinaurics have a connection with silver, which has a lot of symbolism that I've already brought up when compared to the importance of gold to the Golden Order. And the grace of gold itself, as I brought up regarding the comparison of the sun and moon. And Albinaurics are sad, not just because they are, like the Rune of the Unborn says, of children born anew by Rennala, frail and short-lived. Their frailty is obvious, but Albus, the Albinauric, also shares that the frailty of their legs is tied to their lives.
My legs will soon fade, and with them my life. Alas, this is the immovable fate of all Albinaurics.
They are also sad because they are considered beings that exist outside the grace of gold. Yet, what does the Rune of the Unborn do? Perfects those who have been born anew. And as a result, if you look into the eyes of the sweetings, you see the gold color that indicates they do exist within the confines of the Golden Order. Bach the Seamster is interesting in that he's a character we can have undergo Renala's rebirth ritual. The result is unfortunate. Don't do it to my man Bach, please. In that he is perfected from his imperfect demi-human form, but when you first see him, he is unresponsive, and when you reload the area, he is dead. I think the rune did exactly as described. It made Bach perfect in the eyes of the Golden Order. It made him fully human, yet he was not the appropriate stock for a demigod. Only Marika's direct offspring would do for that. And as a result, his tragic mortality is accelerated in this new form. We don't ever see that potential purpose of the Rune of the Unborn. The item which says explicitly it is the great rune of unborn demigods. What happens when a demigod is born anew? In fact, going back to the imagery and symbolism of the cuckoo, what does that say about the form this rune takes? It is an amber egg, something Renala clutches, a woman abandoned by her followers in the academy, her husband, and even her children, all except Ranni. Perhaps she was vulnerable to this subterfuge because her imperfect and short-lived children before Radagon were the Albinaurics, ones she continues to try to help live on through this eternal process of rebirth. But perhaps Rykard, Radahn, and Ranni were different. Children Radagon presented in the nest she had created for herself, and that she used the egg to transform from strangers into her very own children. In nature, the female cuckoo lays her egg directly in the nest of the bird she wants to raise her chick, and they even use their impressive mimicking abilities to sound like predators in an attempt to get the mother of that nest to flee and give the cuckoo mother the opportunity. Symbolically, Radagon served that purpose. The purpose of a guise of a warlord and then husband, who allowed Marika to put her offspring in Renala's nest. And by giving her the egg, Radagon may have provided her the means to perfect Marika's own children who tend to come out cursed, and even provide the link to Renala's magic because it was her ritual that allowed this to take place at all. In recent days, I've even seen some posts on Elden Ring lore subreddits talking about some theories folks have regarding the true nature of Renala's parenthood. Some who stated the likes of Radahn was an Albinauric, or that Renala herself simply can't have children physically, further speculating her children are Albinauric. But I don't think Radahn, Rykard, or Ranni are Albinaurics perfected by the Rune of the Unborn. I think they were the product of Radagon and Marika directly, and Radagon gave Renala the Amber Egg with the intention of having her attach a maternal bond to them and perfect them out of the curses that plagued the other children Radagon and Marika produced. And in this way, they stopped the War of Renala and stopped her attempts at creating her own royal line as part of the Carian royal family. In fact, I think what prevents Marika from doing this to the twins is the lack of a suitable donor. Regardless, I believe this process is what resulted in Ranni. Remember Aeneas' words about the demigods. The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika. To summarize my points here before moving on, my theory so far is that Radagon and Marika were one being before Radagon married Renala. Marika sent Radagon to bring the Carians to heal, and he tried war, but that didn't work, so then he tried marriage. Ranni is Marika and Radagon's child being passed off as Renala's child. Radagon used the Amber Egg as a means of correcting any curse and bonding Renala to the children maternally. Ranni is an Empyrean, which have all been shown to have more than one identity. Melina and Ranni are the two identities of the whole Empyrean. What I haven't yet gotten deep into is which of the identities, Ranni or Melina, is the whole and which is the fragment. So let's talk about that next. 4. Who is in charge, Ranni or Melina? The simplest answer is that Ranni is the source and Melina would be the split. Ranni was Ranni for basically all of her life, and in the framework of the theory so far, Melina only popped up after the ritual was complete to shed their flesh. It would be an opportune time for such a split to happen and create wholesale a splintered fragment of Ranni. Unfortunately, though I wish it were so simple, I'm pulled towards a different conclusion. In my opinion, that simply doesn't quite fit the pattern established so far. Each of the splits I've mentioned previously were a specific, narrow aspect of their source Empyrean. Radagon, as a split personality, would be Marika's own faith and adherence to the Golden Order and the Greater Will. The blind obedience of a leal hound, mayhaps? St. Trina is Miquella's love and compassion. Millicent is Melania's pride as a swordsman. In truth, I think Melina is the source, and Ranni, as we know her, is the offshoot. Ranni the Witch would be the aspect of Melina who is loyal to the mother who raised her, Rennala, and not to her potential true origin in Marika. In fact, Melina seems to be a rather doting daughter of her mother Marika, especially given that she does not appear to have any true memories of what her life was like before she was burned and bodiless. She had a purpose, which was, as she put it, long ago lost, but she was reborn and given new purpose in her role as kindling for the fire that would burn the Erd Tree. Ultimately, what I think to be the case is that Ranni, as the split or offshoot from the source Empyrean of Melina, is somewhat unique. Unlike Miquella and Melania's offshoots, Ranni is the dominant personality. Ranni was given additional attention and life by virtue of her being the identity she was raised within, and her desire to follow her mother Rennala's teachings and goals is what sets her on the path to instigate the Night of Black Knives in the first place, which is interestingly the opposite of the likes of Miquella, who aspired to become a god following in Marika's footsteps. Miquella relinquished his love and compassion in the form of his split personality, Saint Trina. He divested himself of a lot of himself, stripping away the excess until he returned to this realm a god. But if Ranni was the offshoot given more strength by virtue of being the recognized personality and identity of this being, she viewed her own ascent differently. She wished to shed what makes her an Empyrean, and not the other way around. She shed herself of her very Empyrean flesh, and at that moment the two portions of her spirit were released from her body. The Ranni we know, who inhabits Adal to interact with those in the lands between, who would be her agents, and Melina being a demigod and child of Marika with no body, and with barely an indication of who she is, return to the Erd Tree, as is customary for those with status, to be granted an Erd Tree burial. And there, Marika found her and found use for her, allowing her to return to the lands between in this spirit form, divorced from her original purpose as a means to quell the likes of Rennala and the Carian forces, and I think eventually be paired off with the other successful child of Marika who is not spoken about with any signs of a curse either, Godwyn the Golden. Now, I'm not the first person to suggest that Ranni was betrothed to Godwyn, and I doubt I'll be the last. It makes a lot of sense as to that betrothal being the reason for Godwyn's selection as the other half of the ritual to preserve Ranni's spirit. Instead of joining in life and having him become the consort to her status as a new god, they joined together in death, forever connected through this ritual Ranni performed that worked against the Greater Will's designs. At least she thinks so. But this video isn't about whether Ranni and Godwyn were betrothed. Unfortunately, there is no in-text evidence of Ranni being the offshoot personality, because the text doesn't officially acknowledge Ranni and Melina to have this relationship I'm proposing at all. I think there is evidence to say that they are the source Empyrean and split personality, but I admit that whether Ranni is the source or the split is the most nebulous part of my claims today. Some who have been considering the origins of this character may be skeptical on that point, or on others, because there certainly is another more popular position assigned to Melina, the Gloam-Eyed Queen. 5. Is Melina the Gloam-Eyed Queen? I would argue that one of the most popular fan theories about who Melina is would be she is the mysterious figure known only as the Gloam-Eyed Queen. We learn about her in a few different item descriptions. We know, for example, that she once wielded the very power of the Rune of Destined Death Ranni herself stole a fragment of to complete the ritual of the Night of Black Knives. We learn this in the item description of the Godslayer's Greatsword, sacred sword of the Gloam-Eyed Queen who controlled the Godskin Apostles before her defeat at the hands of Malekith. The black flames wielded by the Apostles are channeled from this sword. This also explains she had her own faction, the Godskin Apostles, and that Marika's own shadow, Malekith, defeated her before becoming the vessel for the Rune of Destined Death himself. As shown in the item description for the Remembrance of the Black Blade, Remembrance of Malekith, the Black Blade, hewn into the Erd Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. Malekith was a shadow-bound beast given to his Empyrean. Marika's sole need of her shadow was a vessel to lock away destined death. Even then, she betrayed him. The item description for the Black Flame ritual incantation also explicitly says she was an Empyrean. The Gloam-Eyed Queen led the apostles. It is said that she was an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. And that makes perfect sense when you realize the symbol of the magic incantations wielded by surviving Godskin nobles and apostles hints at this connection with the Fingers. This bears a striking resemblance to the face of a character and boss battle with a character added in the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, known as Meter, Mother of Fingers. It is a symbol reminiscent of Meter's face, which looks like a fingerprint. We get more imagery of the Gloam-Eyed Queen in raising her forces, the Godskin nobles and apostles, with the item description of the Godskin swaddling cloth. Sacred cloth of the Godskin apostles, made from supple skin sewn together. The Gloam-Eyed Queen cradles newborn apostles swaddled in this cloth. Soon they will grow to become the death of the gods. And we learn about the apostles in their Godskin apostle robe item description. Robe made by sewing together patches of smooth skin worn by the Godskin apostles. The apostles, once said to serve destined death, are wielders of the god-slaying Black Flame. But after their defeat by Malekith, the Black Blade, the source of their power was sealed away. And finally, the Godskin Noble Robe's description describes the Gloam-Eyed Queen's oldest followers. Robe made by sewing together patches of smooth skin. Subcutaneous fat makes it plump and soft. Worn by Godskin nobles, known for their seven-face aprons. Nobles are the most ancient apostles who are said to have assimilated inhuman physiology, not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in its primordial form. So the Gloam-Eyed Queen was an Empyrean who created her own followers, swaddling them in robes made of skin and raising them to become her weapons. Wielders of the Black Flame of the Rune of Destined Death. They are meant to become the death of the gods, and given that Marika's own shadow defeated the Gloam-Eyed Queen, people tend to assume one of two things about her. Either she was a rival of Marika's who she ultimately defeated, or she was another personality of Marika's, like Radagon, that rose up and similarly needed to be defeated. Let's set the split personality possibility aside. Assuming the Gloam-Eyed Queen was truly a rival to Marika, who could that rival be? Well, that's where Melina comes into play as an interesting candidate for this long vanquished figure. Let's go over the reasons this fits. First, the game gives us no confirmation of Melina's life before becoming the person we meet. Since her past is mysterious, she already makes for a great suspect for a similarly enigmatic figure that is clearly very important to the rise of Marika's Golden Order. And we know she was important to Marika's rise not just because of the references to Malekith, but due to yet another item description. In a quest that ends at the foot of Godwyn's gross rotted mermaid body thing in Deeproot Depths, we can complete the steps of the quest and receive the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, which states, formed of the two Holobrand half-wheels combined, it will embed the principle of life within death into order. The Golden Order was created by confining destined death. Thus, this new order will be one of death restored. The Golden Order, with the Eternal Queen Marika and her immortal demigod children, exists precisely because of the removal and subsequent sealing of the Rune of Destined Death. Malekith is forced to live in an area of the map that canonically exists outside of time and contain the Black Blade, the Rune of Destined Death, personally. And by doing so, he ushered in the Golden Order that Marika kept. So the Gloam-Eyed Queen was obviously very important, and Melina has a lack of backstory, and there's certainly some thematic resonance with the idea that Marika took her defeated enemy and repurposed her into a tool for her designs. Not to mention, Melina has a lot of connections to the Rune of Destined Death, and Destined Death as a concept. Melina's last words to us as she uses her body as kindling to burn the Erdtree are as follows.
Thank you for guiding me here. The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death.
The item description for her weapon, the Blade of Calling, shares a similar message. Dagger given to one who set out on a journey to fulfill her duty long ago. The power of its former owner, the Kindling Maiden, is still apparent. The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death. That's 2 sources of this information, and they relate to one of the multiple possible endings, the Lord of Frenzied Flame. Your character is tempted by a few characters you meet to take within yourself the Flame of Frenzy, given to you by the ominously named Three Fingers. I won't go too deep into the lore here, but you should understand that the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is considered very bad. It means that all of existence will be burned in a chaos flame that reduces everything to ash, and the temptation to use it comes from the promise that instead of having Melina burn herself, you can use the Frenzied Flame and spare her. However, Melina is completely opposed to this plan.
If you intend to claim the Frenzied Flame, I ask that you cease. It is not to be meddled with. It is chaos, devouring life and thought unending. However ruined this world has become, however mired in torment and despair, life endures. Births continue. There is beauty in that. Is there not? If you would become Lord, do not deny this notion. Please, leave the Frenzied Flame alone.
And here's where everything really comes to a head. And here's the evidence that most who believe Melina to be the Gloam-Eyed Queen is most convincing. If you should proceed with the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending anyway, you are treated to a little cutscene where Melina says this.
Lord of Frenzied Flame. I will seek you as far as you may travel. To deliver you what is yours. Destined death.
Not only does she sound like one who is both an agent and utilizer of destined death, but she has finally opened her left eye that has been sealed throughout the game. This is significant because what does Gloam-Eyed even mean? Gloam is a word for twilight, or specifically the darker part of twilight. Interestingly, that is referenced when she tells you off for going on to inherit the Frenzied Flame in the first place. She says, "Should you rise as the Lord of Chaos, I will kill you as sure as night follows day." An apt thing to say that certainly calls to mind the transition period between night and day, twilight. Not to mention a further connection on her sealed eye. It is sealed behind what appears to be some sort of talon, perhaps of a bird's talon. And that is interesting specifically because of the connection of birds and death in the lands between as well. There are a class of boss enemies called the Deathrite Birds, who are said to have had their own belief system and worship their own god. The explosive ghost flame explains, sorcery of the servants of death. Strike the ground with the staff, triggering an explosion of ghost flame that burns the surrounding area. In the time when there was no Erdtree, death was burned in ghost flame. Death birds were the keepers of that fire. The sacrificial axe item shares hatchet used in ancient sacrificial rite. A death bird is depicted as a malevolent deity. The power of the rite yet lingers. A small amount of FP is restored upon slaying a foe. And finally, and perhaps most significantly, the twin bird kite shield. Shield featuring a vividly painted twin bird. The twin bird is said to be the envoy of an outer god and mother of the death birds. At dwindling levels of HP, this shield slightly boosts both attack and defense, which looks like this. We'll come back to that in a moment. But my overall point here is that there is ample evidence and good reason to think that Melina has this connection to the Gloam-Eyed Queen. So is she the Gloam-Eyed Queen that Marika defeated in her rise to power? I think the answer to that is actually no. Not because I don't find this evidence convincing, but because I think the truth is actually staring us right in the face. I don't think the Gloam-Eyed Queen refers to a singular person. I think it is a title. and I think it is the title of an Empyrean who must bring upon twilight and death to the current order before the new order can fully materialize. In other words, I think Melina is a Gloam-Eyed Queen, rather than the Gloam-Eyed Queen. And I don't think the Gloam-Eyed Queen that Malekith defeated was a rival of Queen Marika or a split personality. I think Marika was the Gloam-Eyed Queen before she cemented the Golden Order. Remember, the Rune of Destined Death is a part of the Elden Ring. It being removed and sealed away is kind of an affront to the cyclical nature of these ages. It allows Marika and the demigod children to stay eternal. The natural order of things would be the end of Marika's age and the destined death to her and her kin that comes with it. Something she personally saw to for the leaders of the age prior to her age of the Erdtree. And I think there are two reasons that Melina is now in a position to become the next Gloam-Eyed Queen and usher in the end to this age that would allow the start to the next. First, if I'm correct that Melina and Ranni are the same person, she would be tied intimately to the Rune of Destined Death. After all, it was the fragment of that rune that Ranni used to slay her Empyrean flesh and become a spirit. If they are two sides of the same coin, if they are split personalities of one another, then Melina's spirit was freed in the same act. And given Malekith's own relationship to the rune is to have become the beast clergyman Gronk, hidden away in Caelid and seeking the death root that springs forth from Godwyn to consume it and take it into himself along with the rest of the rune, I think that's pretty good precedent for there being lasting effects on Ranni and Melina. In other words, Ranni too is an Empyrean who wielded the Rune of Destined Death, even if just a fragment, for the purpose of starting the chain of events to usher in her own Age of Stars. The second reason I think Melina is now in a position to become the next Gloam-Eyed Queen is that I believe out of the three named Empyreans, Ranni, Melina, and Miquella, Ranni was the one whom everyone assumed, Marika included, would succeed Marika, not either of the twins. In fact, the twins seem more like assurance, or perhaps rivals created for the sole purpose of providing Ranni with competition. And why do I think that? This goes all the way back to the conspicuous lack of shadowbound beasts for Miquella or Malenia. I think only Ranni was given a shadowbound beast vassal in the form of Blaidd because she was not just named Empyrean, but was put forth as the Empyrean most able. She was not outwardly cursed in any way that the game ever implies. She had been raised as royalty by Rennala, who had a deep connection to the astrologers, and therefore was more well-rounded in her origins, at least officially. And it would be another good reason to betroth her to Godwyn the Golden as her lord and consort, if that is indeed what happened. Malenia and Miquella, by contrast, are not nearly as ideal candidates. They are both very obviously cursed. Malenia even seems to have no interest in pursuing anything related to her status as an Empyrean, and seems more than content serving her brother. And though Miquella's Age of Compassion sounds nice, I have a hard time believing that he was considered an ideal candidate, given his eternal youth doesn't just appear physical, but also seems to include an eternal naivete. Lastly, let me touch on the twin bird kite shield. This is explicitly called out as an envoy of an outer god, and mother of the death birds. But looking at the shield, we have this dichotomy of the blue bird on a red background on one side, and a red bird on a blue background on the right. What does that remind me of? At least somewhat. Remember the Knights of the Cuckoo? What does their emblem show? The emblem is of a bird. One half of the background is blue, the other red. Now obviously it's not a twin bird, but it is a bird, and more importantly, the twin portion could be explained by the two identities I'm arguing were freed by the Knight of Black Knives. The blue twin bird would be Ranni, who represents the cold of space of the night sky where life and fire do not touch. The red twin bird could be Melina, who represents the flame of ruin, of the flame of destined death. They are even presented as opposites in terms of their connection to temperature. The spirit Ranni we see when she is inhabiting the doll even places the sealed eye on her left, just like Melina's. And ultimately, if you want to usher in Ranni's Age of Stars, you must do so by Melina's aiding. She burns the tree, allowing you passage. And without that, you would never be able to grant death to Radagon or the Elden Beast. You would never be able to brandish the Elden Ring yourself and call upon Ranni to usher in her Age of the Stars. The Gloam-Eyed Queen, Melina, cannot usher in the night of the current age, the death destined to even the likes of Marika, without your help. In order for any of this to work, like the other characters who entreat you to their side, like Melina and Ranni, they need you, the Tarnished. In conclusion, I hope you liked this video. I think it's a solid case, but as with any lore or theory video regarding Elden Ring, that doesn't mean there aren't holes to this explanation, and that doesn't mean your personal interpretation is wrong. Please share your thoughts, whether you think I'm onto something, or whether there are things I've completely lost the plot on. Tell me your personal theories as well, and if you want more in-depth theory videos or videos of me picking apart the themes of my favorite anime and movies, please consider liking, subscribing, clicking the bell, putting down your summon sign, or otherwise wiggling them fingers my way so that I know to keep the content coming. Until next time.